Hello, I'm Cary Bozeman, and this is a conversation with a community leader. And it's hosted and sponsored by Leadership Kitsap. So Jill, Jean, the director of the Kitsap Library, it's so good to have you with me today.
Super nice to be
You
here.
are a community leader.
And thank you for
So, and I followed your career for a long, how long have you been head of the library here now?
that. I'm in my 13th year.
Wow, 13th year.
Yeah.
Well, I always start out kind of being curious about people, where they came from, where you're raised. Where are you from, Jill?
Well, I'm born and bred in Kalamazoo, Michigan, so I always say yes, there really is a Kalamazoo.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was a great place to grow up. It was very oriented to families and a really good place to begin my career in libraries. But the big city drew me here, and I've never looked back. And so Seattle and now Bainbridge Island has become my
Where'd you go to
home.
college?
I went to Western Michigan University with the idea I was going to be a 7th grade math teacher.
There you go.
And
That makes sense.
I didn't end up doing that, but I think my background with math has served me well in terms of budgets and being good stewards of hopefully public dollars.
You have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother, and he works for Western Michigan University as a facility manager, so he does a lot of building for the university.
And at what point did the idea of working for libraries come into your head?
Well, I actually, when I had my first job in libraries, I made $1.75 an hour, and but I had no.
What was that job?
I was actually typing overdues for a public library's bookmobile department.
While you were going to school?
While I was going to school, and I had an office. You know, at that kind of salary, it was sort of unusual to have an office. And
was this in the Kalamazoo library system?
was
Public library?
Exactly, and my office was next door to the library director. And he became a mentor of mine and a friend, and really encouraged me to think about librarianship as a profession. And once I crossed the decision-making line, I never looked back.
Did you have to go back to school to get a degree in
I did.
What do you get a degree in library?
You have to get your MLS degree, which is the Master's of Library Science. So it's an extra 5th-year degree that's required for this.
And was this all in Kalamazoo where you got started?
It was in Kalamazoo, but I think what's happened in Seattle.
How big a town is Kalamazoo?
It's about 100,000, and it swells, of course, when school is in session. But it's a really progressive community to grow up in, a very big involvement with the arts, and now they have their own medical school. So that's really changed the fabric of
So you
of the
grew up
town.
in Kalamazoo. What did your folks do?
My parents both worked for the Upjohn Pharmaceutical Company, so I was kind of a company town brat, if you will, and the Upjohn Company really supported a lot of Kalamazoo workers as well as workers in Portage, Michigan, where I got my first real librarian professional job.
Were you a good student?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I would assume that somebody that's heading a library system would have been a good student.
Well, I was a compulsive student. I studied really hard, but I liked to get good grades. And so it's always been a strong influence of mine because I very luckily had educators in my background. My aunt was a teacher, my uncle was a principal, and so they really instilled in me early on the desire to really use my education well.
Would you say you were a curious person?
Oh, absolutely, and I think I am to this day.
To this day. It's funny. I'm the same way, and although I was not an A student in high school, I won't go into that, but I still to this day at my age, if someone recommends a good book to me where I can learn from it and maybe get better from it, I'll pick it up and read it. And I don't think you ever quit, no matter what age, being curious and how to improve and how to grow.
It's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So.
And I think I've been very fortunate to have a number of mentors along the way that, you know, kind of pushed me when I needed to be pushed, and I feel very fortunate.
And I'm sure you've mentored other people yourself.
I'd like to
think
I
do you
do.
see that as a responsibility?
Oh, absolutely. Especially at the age I find myself at when I'm thinking about my own retirement. So how do I indeed pass the torch to people that will take my place and do it well?
So how do you get from Kalamazoo to, I know you worked in Seattle before you came to Kitsap County.
Did.
What brought you to the Seattle area?
Well, it was really the draw of the big city, but I absolutely wanted to work for Seattle Public Library, and I did that for 20 years. And
Why, did they have a reputation at that time, that Seattle Public Library?
They did it, mostly it being located in the one city that I wanted to live in. And I felt Seattle was big enough but not so big that I couldn't be happy here. And then ultimately I found myself living on Bainbridge Island, which was a ferry commute from Seattle, and it was a glorious way to go to work for 15 years.
What was your job at Seattle?
I had probably 4 or 5 jobs, but I started as the manager of the children's department, and then I ended it as what was called at the time Director of Public Services, which was the central library and all of the 26 branch libraries.
So there's 26 branches
Yeah.
in the Seattle library system?
Yeah.
There still are?
Yes, there are.
I remember I grew up in the Wallingford, Green Lake area, and we had a little Green Lake library
Yes.
that everybody loves. And,
Yes. Well, and the Wallingford Library was substantial
Wallingford, yeah.
too, and the connection we had to the Fremont Public Association was absolutely wonderful. And I think really began my interest in partnerships as part of being a good community member.
The new Seattle Library's always been an interesting building to me. To be honest with you, there's a part of it, I'm not sure I like it.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit, because that's an interesting project. I mean, it's
Yeah.
the biggest library in our region.
Yes.
How did that happen? Who designed it? Who made the decisions about it? Because it does not look like you would think of as a library.
Well, you're cutting me a little bit where I live, because I was one of the members of the 3-person team that helped build that library. And
I said I liked it a lot, didn't I? Once you get inside the library, I love it. But outside the look of it, I've always been a little challenged by.
Well, I think what I said to people all along is that architecture is art, and so it really speaks to you or it doesn't. But I think what that library did, and I feel very proud of this, is it sort of reestablished the conversation about the importance of libraries in the community and how active they could be as really coalescers of community. And to that I say bravo. So
I've never noticed, is there parking for that building?
there's 140 parking spaces underneath the building.
Oh, really?
And I know that very well.
Yeah.
Because we had intended for over 200, and that just wouldn't happen there on that city block.
Well,
But it was an opportunity for this town to really be influenced by an international architect, and
who was the architect?
Rem Koolhaas out of the Netherlands, and he was a very large personality and had very strong ideas about buildings with a public presence. And I really appreciated the ability to work with him and some of the people in his shop. It was really an experience.
Maybe for me, it's the being of the age where library buildings should be looked like the Paul Allen Library, right? I mean, I've got that old traditional sense about what library, libraries are different now. They're not what they used to be. They're all different. And well, you set your mark in Seattle, that's for sure, if you were one of the leaders on that project.
Yeah. My responsibility was the building program, and so that was done and redone some more on long trips over to Rotterdam. But I think we got a library that a lot of people it's a big space, and there are some unusual spaces there, but I think people can find themselves in that library, and as a result, it's remaining a very, very busy library.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
How'd you pay for it?
It was one of the biggest bond campaigns was passed, one of the biggest in libraries across the country history, but certainly the biggest one for Seattle. And then there was a monumental fundraising campaign that backed that.
Private?
Private, absolutely.
Do you remember who led that campaign?
His name was Cary, and to this day he's a wonderful friend of mine. He's now retired, but what I say to people is we were very fortunate to not only have very philanthropic-minded people in Seattle, but we also lived in a city where both Paul Allen and Bill Gates wanted to influence libraries, and how lucky we were.
That's not a bad combination.
Not a bad combination at all.
Funding libraries is something we'll talk about later, but it's getting more difficult. Libraries are special governments, right? What do we call them? Special purpose governments?
Yes.
So you have taxing authority.
We do.
So But more and more, libraries are being dependent on raising their own private money
Absolutely.
to make ends meet, so to
Yeah.
speak. So Seattle, how many years in Seattle system?
20.
20 years in the Seattle system.
Yeah.
What lured you to Kitsap County?
Well,
I'm
about
sure it wasn't the money.
I think it was the idea of living in my own community, but I was just very fortunate that the director that had hired me 20 years prior in Seattle was now with a headhunting firm, and he had asked if I would be interested in going out on the market and maybe changing my course to another kind of library system. And so I was looking at a number of opportunities, both in Seattle and outside of the area, and I ended up finding out that the Kitsap job was available.
Because you were living on Bainbridge,
I was
right?
living on Bainbridge. So the idea
Do you still
of,
live on Bainbridge?
I do. And the idea of living in my own community and supporting my own community library system was something that I really cared about. And I had an option to move to another large city, and I feel very glad that I didn't take that option. But always when you take a new job, you sometimes get some surprises, and I found quite a few surprises here, and one of which we were more of a struggling library system than I knew, and our finances were not in good order.
So finishing up about what brought you here and what you found out once you got here, which that you were in maybe a more difficult situation than you had anticipated. Would that be fair?
I think that would be fair. In fact, there were moments that we really didn't know if we could even make our payroll. Things were a little bit desperate, and I think what had happened is the library system hadn't adjusted to some new tax laws that were on the books, and I think a lot of the viewers out there might remember I-747, which really changed the course for regional district libraries like ourselves that had taxing authority. So whereas we could originally, our library board of trustees could levy between 1% and 6% at their discretion, we were then capped at 1%, and that changed our course. And the library system, that was passed in 2002, and the library system hadn't adjusted.
Well, what people don't realize, but I do because I was on the city council in Bellevue back in the 70s and 80s when you had the 6% maximum authority. And in those days, the formula was usually we could take, if we wanted to take the 6%, we could take 3 for inflation, you know, your cost of living, your health insurance and all that, and then you could take 3% and put it along for capital improvements and new infrastructure to support the growth. And cities and libraries could exist and get by. Now, with the cap at 1%, you can't. That's why cities we're cutting back, we're not providing the same services we used to provide. Luckily, inflation rates have been lower in the last 20 years, so it hasn't been as harmful to cities. But the whole government structure changed when that initiative was passed, and it's made it much more difficult.
It really did, and then coupled with the recession that happened in 2008, 9, and 10, plus medical costs rising. There was one year our medical costs for our staff increased by 33%, and it just was a very difficult time.
Were you laying people off, I assume?
We were not.
Oh, you didn't lay people off?
The one thing we weren't able to do is really, we could give step increases to our staff, but we had to even decrease those. But we weren't able to give cost of living adjustments, but I said to our staff, I want to keep your job secure. And so we were not able or not needing to lay people off. And I feel very proud of that to this day.
You should.
We protected jobs, and
you
that's
should,
what we were
because most
about.
governments didn't do that. Most governments had to lay people off and
That's correct.
cut benefits and all those.
Or furlough staff.
Or furlough staff.
We knew that in Seattle.
That's right. So that's a difficult time. There's nothing more difficult than being in financial stress.
That's correct.
That's a lot of sleepless nights. I remember I used to work for a nonprofit organization, the Boys and Girls Clubs in King County. Pretty big organization. And we always made our payroll. But one year I remember my finance director called me, and it was Christmas, December. And he said, Cary, we can't make payroll. This big grant we had anticipated didn't come in. And I can't, that was maybe the most difficult moment in my. And one of our board members loaned us money, and we paid him back. So So, okay, I kind of understand what brought you over here. You wanted to work in this community. You didn't want to leave, and you had other opportunities, but you lived on Bainbridge. You know, we kind of get hooked on the Pacific Northwest.
We sure do.
We do. Nobody leaves here.
No,
Even though the weather is crummy most of the time. No, we all love it here.
Yes.
So, just to divert for a minute, what do you do when you're not working at the library?
I'm a big walker. I used to be a really big runner. And
Oh,
I
you're
did
marathon
that.
type?
Yeah, I did. I ran before it was interesting for a lot of women to run. In fact, my first running shoes are now considered antiques,
really?
which is kind of funny. But I now bike, and I just got a brand new electric bike that I'm in love with.
Oh, gosh, a
and
lot of people are buying those
yeah,
things.
and I do a lot of gardening too. So,
Yeah.
so a lot of things that.
My favorite public space is Green Lake.
Yeah.
And I know you've run at Green Lake, we've walked at Green Lake, but when I talk about communities, I just say the value of public spaces, and that one is so perfect because
It is.
everybody's there, old people, young people, all denominations, all colors, everything, and they're peacefully walking around this lake, and they end up where they started, and it's just the best public space.
It really is.
So jogging, running. You still running?
I'm walking a lot.
You're walking.
Yeah.
I'm a walker.
Yeah.
What'd you think of the Women's World Cup soccer program?
I watched the whole
did.
match without leaving the sofa.
I did too.
It was pretty exciting.
It was inspirational.
Yeah, very much
You know,
so.
we're going through a difficult time in this country, and it was nice to be able to take a break and be inspired by that. I mean, I really appreciated that. So I want to switch gears here. Libraries are changing, social media, Amazon. My wife's a big user of the library, but she also gets online and gets a book the next day, right, from Amazon. So what's the future of libraries?
I like to say that, especially in this day of technology, we're never going to run out of the need for people to come together. So I think libraries as a place for community to happen, for people to come together, will always be important. And we find our libraries, you know, being the place where hard conversations can happen, where people can meet, where children can learn, where we can have STEM activities in the afternoon. But not only is it a place of education, but also a place to bring people together.
Oh, a gathering place.
Gathering place, absolutely.
Technology a big part of the library now?
Technology is always a big part of the library, and keeping current with that is one of the challenges,
Right.
but we're doing a pretty good job of that here in
Right.
Kitsap, I think.
Right. If you built a new library, would it look a lot different than ones we built 10 or 15 years ago?
Not that much, except you want more flexibility, and you want probably less space for books. We aren't going to be warehouses for books in our future. We're going to be places of great flexibility for people, again, to gather in 2s or 4s or 20 or 200.
Somewhere I read that was it our library system, Kitsap, that you're not charging fees for overdue books anymore?
That's correct, yes.
Why is that?
Well, it turns out
We all
that
used to worry about, oh, we haven't taken that book back to the library, jeez.
well, and I worry about that to this day.
gonna
I've
get a big
probably got one or
fine.
two overdue books right now, but I think what the fines proved to be was a barrier to a lot of people really continuing to use the library, especially children and teens. And if we can get rid of barriers in terms of the service we provide, we really want to do that. And, you know, one of the stories I tell is right after we stopped having the fines, I was introduced to a woman at our Silverdale library, and our branch manager had told me to come over and chat with her, and I wasn't really sure if I was going to get a complaint or something else. But she looked at me and she burst into tears, and she said she'd had a really tough year. She'd had medical issues, she'd had family issues, and the one thing that worried her was her library fines, and the fact that we had gotten rid of those was one less thing for her to be
That's a great story.
unhappy about. So she was very grateful, but I'd like to believe we're bringing people back to the library because the fines are no longer there.
And it probably saves you time in not having to administer that, right?
Absolutely, and it's not that we aren't being good stewards, because we still care about getting our materials back.
Right.
So people will get a bill if they don't return them, but we even do that tenderly and just ask them to please bring it back so others can use it.
You know, Jill, this is maybe a little different question, but we're living in a time where homelessness and people on the street and people really, and I'm assuming you get people coming in the library that getting out of the cold or maybe looking for a cup of coffee, and how do you deal with that?
We deal with those patrons just like we would any other patrons, with respect and kindness, and help them with what their needs are.
Good.
And I think, you know, the challenge in this day and age is who are the homeless people and what do they look like? Because another story that I tell is a woman was chatting with one of our librarians at our Bainbridge Library and talking to him about how kind and respectful he had been to her over the years. And she said to him, "I bet you didn't know that for 3 months of last year I was homeless and living out of my car." And this was a woman who always came in perfectly dressed.
Wow.
But for 3 months out of that year, she had not had a place to call home. So who are the homeless in our community? I think we might be surprised.
Yeah, no. And the challenge of dealing with the people that need us is just only going to get more difficult, more severe, and you know, communities need to not push that off and think it's going to go away. It's in Seattle gotten to that fix. I worked in downtown Seattle from '85 to '95 in Pioneer Square, and we were having homeless issues then, and we were having dangerous people issues. And here it is 30 years later, and my sense is they really never dealt with it in an appropriate way. And
That's
now
correct.
it's gotten to be a crisis for them.
Yes.
So a community like ours, all the agencies, the governments, the libraries, the private sector need to really think deeply about this issue the next 20 years, because it's going to not go away, it's going to be more severe.
It's absolutely true.
So just for a perspective, how big is the Kitsap Library? How many branches, how many people, what's your budget, how do you finance it?
We have 9 libraries, so we run the gamut of from down in Manchester all the way up to the Little Boston Library on the S'Klallam Indian Reservation. We have about 200 employees, and our budget is roughly in the neighborhood of $15 million, and that's not counting the private contributions that our foundation brings in.
So you have a foundation?
We do. That was one of the big things that I wanted to really get established when I came to Kitsap. We had a quasi-foundation that was functioning, but had limited staffing, and we really needed to bring up that game. And so we were able to do that, and now we have several employees that are raising really strong dollars for the library system.
Is the foundation a separate nonprofit organization?
It is its own 501c3 nonprofit, and you know, doing a great job. So we're very fortunate.
You deal at all with the Kitsap Foundation? Do you have any relationship with them?
We certainly work with them, and some of our donors have accounts that are established with the Kitsap Community Foundation.
Because they've really emerged as a factor in our community, in a good way.
Yes.
I really appreciate Cole Medina that runs the foundation.
No, he's great, and they've just started a women's giving circle, and a number of our staff, including myself, are a part of that too.
So I want to get into the story of the new emerging library. I know you guys have, the library systems wanted to build a new library in Silverdale area for a long time.
Yes.
And I remember a few years back when I was part of a group that looked at how much money we could raise for that project, and we didn't quite meet the standard that we needed to raise enough money, so we put the project off, if I remember. And then you bought some property and you said, we're going to build a project here, and now you've turned completely 360 and you're going to build a new library where and with who?
Well, very fortunately, we're going to be on the Central Kitsap School District campus, and we're going to be co-locating a public library with the school administration. And so
working together with another government.
Working together with another government
entity.
No
silos.
No silos at all. And how can we do bigger things together is what it's all about. And I really couldn't turn down 2,000 students on my doorstep, and what library wouldn't love to be a part of this campus?
So will the Kitsap Library be the library for the schools?
No, not at all.
Not
Not
at
at all.
all.
We would not begin to supplant the school library. They have a very different mission, which is speaking to the school curriculum. We are for the whole public, and so our collection would be somewhat different, but supportive certainly. But we're so glad to be there, and I think again. How we work together over time is yet to be determined, and I think the sky's the limit in terms of
So
what
where
we
are
can
you
do
in the
together.
process?
We're right at the beginning of design development, which is really getting serious about design, and just finishing up our capital campaign, and we are right on the verge of complete success with that
What's
too.
the dollar number?
We're raising a little over $4 million for this project. Again, one of the reasons coming into this cooperative project was to save money. So building exclusively on our own, I think the project would have been double, if not triple. And so we're saving good dollars this way.
Yeah, it makes so much sense.
It
You know,
really does.
we get into these situations where we're so protective of our own government, our own organization, that we don't look at combining resources and
Right.
sharing responsibility. It just makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
So this program's about leadership. How do you describe yourself as a leader?
I'm a very relational person, and I think I develop relationships with people that I meet, and I think I'm an accessible leader, and I think people find it very easy to talk to me about ideas and thoughts that they might have, and I also like to make things happen. So I believe that I'm a catalyst as a leader for sometimes taking a dare or two to sort of do what I call stepping out into the air, which I may not have all the I's dotted and T's crossed, but I sometimes think it's an idea worthy of challenging
You keep
us.
like a 3-year plan where you've got your priorities laid out, and here's what we're going to do in the next 3 years?
Well, we used to have a 5-year plan, and but I think the world is changing so fast, and we are moving so fast as a library system that we're in the middle this last year of adopting an agile strategic plan, which is a plan that is ever moving forward, so we always have a 5-year in the future plan, but we're adding to it every single day, and I think it's the only way.
Last question. We are going to see a lot of growth in Kitsap County in the next 20 years.
Yes.
20 years goes by pretty fast, especially at my age. I realize how fast that goes by. But with what's going on in Seattle, the cost of living in Seattle, the growth of the Seattle job market, all that, where at the same time the people that work in Seattle can't find a home for less than $800,000. So right now, as we speak today, the real estate market here is hot. People are looking to move here and still work in Seattle because we have the fast ferries. Where do you see 20 years out with this kind of anticipated growth, the library system going?
Well, I think it's what kinds of services can we provide to people. One of the things I'm really proud of that the library system is just starting, and I only see it getting larger, is that we're taking on the Small Business Development Center in cooperation with Western Washington University. And business centers are usually run by universities or municipalities and rarely by libraries, but we saw an opportunity, we wanted to do that, and I think support a business in the climate ahead is really going to be important.
Well, Jill, I always think of leaders as people who leave it better than they found it, and you certainly are going to meet that criteria. You've done a great job here. You're really well respected in the community. I don't know anybody that ever says anything bad about Jill Jean, for gosh sakes. I wish I could say that about myself. But I've enjoyed talking to you. Hopefully the people know a lot more about the library system now. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
And it's been nice being with you again. Don't forget to support Leadership Kitsap, who supports this program. We'll see you next time with one of our community leaders.